So the red light came on. Does that mean it's going?
That's all.
Okay. Good morning, Senator Morgan.
Good morning.
Would you like to introduce yourself for the camera, please?
Well, I'm a 50-year lawyer. I'm Robert Morgan. I started practicing law in Lillington 51 years ago now, or 51 in September. And I've been involved in public life and politics and the law practice for the last 51 years.
Well, thank you very much. Could you please tell us about your growing up years?
Well, that's a long, you opening the door, but I'm interested. You know, a poet said one time that God made memory so that we could smell the roses in December. I've reached that point now that my memories are very meaningful to me. So you asked me where I grew up. I grew up between Lillington and Angier. That's Highway 210 south of Raleigh on a tobacco and cotton farm. My home is still there about 3 miles north of Lillington. We did not have electricity. Of course we had no running water. And I just can remember the road from Angier to Lillington being paved. I remember seeing the tar trucks spreading the asphalt. So that's been a long time ago. By the way, I will be 76 years old in October.
October of 2001.
2001.
You were born in which year?
Hmm?
Which year were you born in?
In 1925. So I grew up there, and I was the youngest of 6 children. And we did not have electricity until I was in about the 8th grade. So what little studying we were able to do, we did it by lamplight.
How do you think that affects your view of life, that you saw that huge change with electricity?
I think it had a great influence on my whole outlook for all of my life, because I think I appreciate the rural people. I appreciate what it was like growing up hard. And maybe I have a little bit too much empathy for the underprivileged than I would have if I had not grown up there. But let me digress. This is I did not realize this until recently. I was born in that house, which I now own, by lamplight. And my neighbor held the lamp. Now, of course, she's dead, but her daughter, who just died at 92, had told it many times and reminded me of it some time ago. But from there, you know, I went to...
Well, hold on a minute before you go on. I wanted to ask you a little more about what the rural life was like, and who some of your neighbors were, and how they lived, and how you all lived as a family.
Well, rural life at that time, we didn't know that we were poor. We grew almost all of our own food. We grew our meat and our everything except sugar and a few staples. And of course, we only knew our neighbors because transportation wasn't that great. So, in fact, everybody from almost every family from Angier to Lillington were related. They were either Matthews, Morgans, Johnsons, or Joneses, and really they all intermarried. But now, unfortunately, now in where we are today, I am the last of the old families that even has any interest in that 10-mile stretch. So, but they were our family and our friends.
And
My wife thinks sometimes that, well, we all think we have a hard time, but my mother would get up early in the morning and cook breakfast.
What was breakfast?
Breakfast was homemade biscuits, which she made 3 times a day. And we had old country ham, which we used to hate and now we love, and eggs and so forth. But while she was cooking breakfast, she would also be cooking her vegetables for dinner, as we called it then. And by the time the first load of tobacco came from the field to the tobacco barn, Mama would be there ready to start work. And at lunchtime, she would leave the barning area about 15 minutes, go to the house, and put the food on the table, and fix the side table. And then while we'd come all in and eat, and while she was cleaning up, we'd be lying out on the porch resting. But when we got back to go to the tobacco barn or to the barning area, Mama would be right there with us.
I see. You worked. Then when you weren't in school, all the children worked in the
Yes.
tobacco barn?
From the very time you were big enough to do little chores around the barn, you did work. And suckering tobacco, which is another area. Something I want to tell you about Mama and fixing the table. We always had a hired hand. I remember he was a colored person, as we'd call him then. But Buckner, who was, I loved him, probably loved him more than I loved my brothers at that time. But I was always with him. But he ate, not at the table with the rest of us, but at the side table. Mama always had a table. We'd all eat at the same time, but he ate over on the side table. It's hard to believe now, but we were pretty progressive and liberal then, because at least we ate in the same room.
But this was the convention at the time?
Oh, yes.
It just was not done for blacks and whites to eat together?
Blacks and whites did not eat together in North Carolina until after the sit-ins began in Greensboro in 1960. And even then, it was very rare. I did some legal work for a group down in Fayetteville that was putting together a cemetery for blacks, Negroes as we call them then.
And you were in private practice by this point?
Oh, yes.
In which town, in Lillington?
In Lillington, but I had clients. In those days, you practiced in all three, in the surrounding counties. And we had a business meeting to organize a corporation. And all of the incorporators were blacks, including a very prominent black doctor. And my good friend, Dr. Baggett, who was from Lillington White. But we had to go out to the officers' club because we could not meet in a restaurant in Fayetteville. Now that's hard to believe, but
Which officers' club was that?
Fort Bragg.
So the Army did allow so-called intermingling?
Yes, and remember Harry Truman started that about 1948, but it hadn't been going on very long.
All right. Well, let's go back to your mom, your mother, and tell me a little about your mother first, and then your dad, and what you learned from them that you carried with you and that helped inspire you.
Well, going back to Mama, that's how hard she worked. And I do remember this, when World War II came on and I was in the Navy, she worked at Fort Bragg because they brought in everybody. They needed help so bad. And Mama and 3 or 4 of the other ladies worked for bringing, and you know what they did? Their job was folding clothes. Mainly because Mama was functionally illiterate. When she was in what we would call the 3rd grade, she'd hurt the shin bone in her leg, and it never really healed, and she didn't go to school but anymore after that. But she had educated herself very well. But she worked at Fort Bragg during the war, doing her part, what little she could. And my daddy, I just can remember when he had a heart attack. This was in the 30s. There was a program vaccinating people for typhoid fever. And the doctor had come out to the county health doctor, had come out to the little church and gave everybody shots. And apparently Papa had a reaction. But in those days, if you had a heart attack, they didn't even want you to walk, let alone drive or do anything. Now, of course, they want you to jog. But Papa had a heart attack, so from then on, but he did work, doing things what he could. But then you got to remember now, in 1942, I left to, I graduated from high school, May the 5th, 1942, 16 years old. We didn't have but 11 grades back then.
I see. Well, let's go back to your mother. It sounds like she had a very strong work ethic that you learned from.
She did, and a good work ethic, and she insisted that we have one too.
Did you all go to church?
Oh, yes, yes.
Which one?
We went to the Neals Creek Baptist Church, which again is between Angier and Lillington. After Roosevelt came in, when we were able to get an old car.
You did not have a car until 40?
Well, we had one during the early Depression, but I think we pushed it more than we drove.
I see.
And I remember an old green Chrysler. But there was a little Presbyterian church right near our home, and that's where my sister and I started going to Sunday school and church. But after Roosevelt came in, we went back to our family church.
And is this, I'm trying to remember, 1936 or 1940 when he came in? Roosevelt. Do you remember which year he came in? Do you remember which year FDR came in?
Oh, yes, 1933.
33.
Yes, he came in. He came in 1933. Now, I look back, and I've been for years telling everybody how poor we were. And we were very poor in keeping with today's standards. But then, on the other hand, nobody had electricity in the country until Roosevelt came in with his REA programs. And that was,
go ahead.
Mhm.
Well, how is it that Roosevelt coming in had something to do with you getting a car and being able to go to the Baptist church?
Oh, well, you know, before Roosevelt came in, we had the Hoover Depression.
Right.
Oh, and people in the towns were standing in food lines.
Do you remember this?
Just can remember. But I remember Papa saying that we lived really better during the Depression in comparison than we'd ever lived, because we grew all of our own food, but the people in town had no money to buy food. You know, that's when people in New York were jumping out of windows and standing in food lines, and they were around here too. And we had Roosevelt brought in the WPA, Work Project Administration. So after Roosevelt came in and began to put in farm programs, I remember us plowing up cotton. In other words, under his program, you had so much cotton and tobacco that they put in control so that you could limit production. That's when we began to get a little money to live a little better.
I see. And then you went to the Baptist church?
Went to the Baptist.
And what influence did your church and your mama and dad's religion have on you?
Very, very much influence, and it's still with me. The political consultants used to tell me that whatever I believed, and there was no black and no white, no gray area. They used to say, they put it this way: whatever the hell it is you believe, you believe. But in my church, Neals Creek Church, I guess there was no such thing as fundamentalist and Christian coalitions. But Baptists were pretty conservative. I remember my Sunday school teacher, with her, it was right or it was wrong. There was no gray area at all. And that sort of stuck with me all my life. I have, you know, of course, moderated my views a lot, but that had a great influence. And I remember also poundings. You probably never heard of a pounding. You know, you had no welfare programs, except just no welfare programs until Roosevelt came in, as far as I knew. But if there was somebody in need in the community, the church would have a pounding. That's where everybody would come together and bring a pound of this and a pound of that to help them. And when they talk about, you know, the faith-based programs that President Bush is talking about, well, that's fine, but the churches can't do it uniformly. You may be pounding a needy family over here, but there may be 10 families over here that you don't know about. But anyway, that's the kind of background and environment. My great, how far back I can't remember, grandfather and grandmother came to the Neals Creek area in 1790 because they had worn the land out in Virginia. And you didn't have fertilizer.
Right.
And they came and cleared the area, and where Neals Creek Church is and Harnett Central School, where they settled. So we've never moved over 200 years, and we've never moved from that area. I've never lived anywhere else.
Did you have any inkling when you were a child that you were going to grow up to do great things in the world? Did your mother tell you that you should aspire to great things, public service?
I don't have any independent recollection much of it, except that my mother and daddy were proud and encouraged it. I remember, they did that. They made sure that we went to school. But along that line, let me tell you an interesting episode. I was president of my senior class. I have no recollection of how I got to be president or not, what happened. But in high school you always had, you had class night. Oh, class prophecies is what I'm talking about. We had class prophecies. Well, 40 years later, I guess, in the 70s, my class had a reunion. And somebody had saved a little mimeograph newspaper. And it had the class prophecies in there. And it had something like this: the curtains open, and a new building is about to be dedicated, and a new federal building, and the United States Senator Robert Morgan is making the address. I don't think I even knew what the United States Senate was, let alone had any ambitions for it. But there must have been something in the background, because they said I was a class officer, and that prophecy was there. But
that was a prophecy.
In the high school newspaper in 1942.
Is that right?
It's unreal to me, because I certainly I have no recollections of it.
Did some of your older brothers and sisters have a role in raising you as well and influencing you?
No, did not. My oldest sister, of course, died in infancy. I don't know really why. My oldest sister, who's now living in 90, ran away and got married when she was 16. Went to South Carolina. And Papa learned that they were going to South Carolina, so when they got there, he was waiting for them and sent them back, but then they ran away again the next week. So see, she was gone from home from 16, and I was about 2.
I see.
Then I had an older brother who he, best I can remember, during the war, he worked, in the war project. But then I had another brother, Melvin, who had a real bad speech impediment. And this is interesting, in that in the 2nd grade, they asked him to withdraw from school because they couldn't understand him.
I see.
And I remember that Papa and Mama took him to Johns Hopkins. And I don't know how they knew about Johns Hopkins or how they got there, but they did. They tried to do everything they could. But he grew up and died being unable to read and write because the schools wouldn't let him attend. Now, from time to time, I served as a special administrative law judge. And I've been hearing cases with Americans under the Americans for Disability Act. And gracious life, in my adjoining county, there are 5,400 students in Cumberland County that have to have independent education plans for those because of their disabilities.
I see.
If they had something like that 50, 60 years ago, my brother might have been able to read and write, but now I tell you what, talking about the work ethic, and you're leading me to think things that I hadn't thought about. but he had a work ethic. But he couldn't get a job. Worked on the farm, but the Mr. Weaver, who was the in charge of the highway department in the county, put him to work driving a truck, and he had to memorize the signs, you know, and so forth. And he worked there for 35 years, and I don't think he missed a day or so. But so I guess somewhere along the work ethic was instilled in us. Then it come down to my sister next to me, who's 2 years older than I am, who's retired now from the university as a professor at the University of Florida.
What did she teach?
She taught special education, which sort of ties in again to my brother Melvin. She went to East Carolina and taught in Goldsboro, or Goldsboro area, for a couple of years, and then she and some young girls decided it'd be nice to teach in Daytona Beach, and they went there. She hadn't been there long before she was asked by the Junior Women's League to teach in the first handicapped children's school, mentally and physically, that we knew anything about. And she did, and she got, you know, dedicated to it. And then about 1960, this was probably the late 40s and 50s, the University of Florida asked her to come over. And for make a long story short, she taught there in the university over 35 years.